Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. This week on the show, I'm joined by Steve Magness, a world-renowned performance coach and author, to discuss the research-backed best practices for setting healthy goals for our pursuits, performing under pressure, and dealing with failure. All right, welcome back to the Wired to Hunt podcast, brought to you by First Light and their Camo for Conservation initiative. And I'm excited here today because we've got an absolute banger for you. We are wrapping up our kind of prepping for the new year series. I hate to say new year, new you, because that's kind of cliche and stupid, but it's kind of the only packaged phrase that I know of that kind of explains what we've been trying to do here the last few weeks, kind of getting ourselves ready for this next 12-month window, resetting things, recentering ourselves, and making sure that we're, moving forward in the right way. And our episode today, I think, is a perfect way to wrap it up because it, in my mind, is a terrific kind of callback to where this all started. At the very end of 2024, Tony and I did an episode in which we kind of reflected back on the last year and thought through, what were the good things, what were the bad things, what brought us joy, what brought us fulfillment, what led to success, and however you define that, and then how can that inform us to plan this next year ahead. And what we kind of stumbled on, I guess, and it's something we have talked about over the years, but one of the things we stumbled on was the fact that, when we layer all these different expectations and outcome-focused goals and how we compare to other people, when we started caring about that kind of stuff, it led to poor hunting success, not a lot of excitement and fun, and a lot of stress. And so how do we still try to become better deer hunters? How do we still try to fill tags and have success, but do it in a way that, brings us that enjoyment, fun, and satisfaction that we're looking for, that got us into this in the first place? And it's something that I know is not unique just to us. I've heard from countless numbers of you guys who are experiencing the same things. I've got a handwritten letter right here from someone who has been experiencing this very same thing. So I want to continue to find ways to address it and help us all so we can kind of work through this stuff and get the very most positive aspects out of our hunting journeys and leave this baggage behind. Because when we obsess too much about filling a tag or killing a mature buck or having a big buck to show our friends on Instagram, whatever it is, when we add this self-induced pressure and we fall for this kind of comparison culture, when we do that stuff, it's not why we do this in the first place. It takes away from what is an incredible pursuit and experience. And so the question then is, what's the alternative? What is the better way? How can we do all this that is going to leave us in a better, happier, and more successful place? And the answers, or at least some of the answers, I think can be found with our guest today on the podcast. Our guest is Steve Magness. He is a former track and field coach and now a world-renowned expert on peak performance. He has been a performance coach for Olympic athletes, professional athletes, business leaders, military service members. He's the author of a number of different books, which I've enjoyed. I've read a bunch of his books, including The Passion Paradox, Peak Performance, Do Hard Things, and most recently, his brand new book that's coming out here in a week or two is called Win the Inside Game. And this book, I think it was almost as if he wrote this book just for us. Like the things he discussed are so perfectly parallel to what Tony and I have been kind of riffing on here in recent weeks. It's uncanny how spot on it is. We discuss how to set goals that are healthy. We discuss how to handle high pressure moments. We discuss how to, specialize in an area that you care about and continue to grow and get better and achieve, new things, but do it in a healthy way, doing it in a way that's not going to get you overstressed out. That's not going to make you feel worse about it. That's not going to make killing a deer a relief instead of something that you're just really excited about. And the experience itself is really great too. So we discuss all of that. We discuss, like I mentioned, performing under pressure. We talk about choking, how to, not choke, how to deal with failure when it does come, and much, much more. This is a chat that's filled with insights that are backed up by research and science. Steve has a tremendous wealth of experience personally and has also then dug through the literature and talked to the experts on all these things. So this is something that, is applicable to world-class athletes, top of the world business leaders, and even us deer hunters. So I am very excited for our chat today, so I think we should just get right to it. Here's my conversation with Steve Magness. All right, here with me on the line now is Steve Magness. Welcome to the show, Steve.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited for this.
Me too. I, like I mentioned just a second ago off air, I've been reading your work for a lot of years now. You and Brad have, I think, spoken to so many different things I've dealt with, whether it's been, physical fitness and sport related things, whether it's been kind of the mental side of peak performance. I've always been someone who has, been pushing and striving. I'm very achievement oriented. I'm what some people I think call these days an insecure overachiever. Has been like the trendy buzzword these days that I've heard. I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds like me. But you've got this new book that is coming out right around the same time that this podcast will be airing, called Win the Inside Game. And as I read it, it felt like you were writing to an audience of one, just me. It was as if you had somehow infiltrated my mind over the last year or so and read all of my thoughts, saw what I've gone through over the last year or two, and thought, I need to write a book for Mark. Here we go. And you did it. So I want to paint a picture for you of a hypothetical scenario, a person, a stand-in, we'll say, and I'm curious if this sounds familiar at all, if you've heard of anyone going through this. Let's imagine someone, we'll call him Bill, and Bill grew up as a young kid, following his dad and grandfather and friends out into the outdoors, hunting and fishing, and he would, get an absolute thrill joining the men out there at the cabin, maybe hearing the stories, spending time outside. It was always an adventure. It was a surprise. There was camaraderie. It was terrific. He fell in love with it. As he, though, got older, he then found himself wanting to get better at these things. So he started reading the articles, reading the books. He continued down that road. He started having some success. Now he's watching the YouTube videos telling him exactly how to get better at this thing and this training regimen and this particular protocol. Now he's listening to all the podcasts, drilling into how the best in the world are doing this and how he can have that same kind of success. Now he's obsessing over going out there into the field and being as successful of a hunter as he possibly can, pushing himself 365 days a year to be the best he possibly can be. He's following all of his favorite professional hunters or outdoorsmen on Instagram and YouTube and seeing all of their successes. And when he does have success, he's posting it there and feeling better and better with every single new like he sees popping up, kind of validating his success. But as this trend continues and he gets deeper and deeper and deeper into it, he starts finding himself out there going into the field to go for a hunt and not necessarily feeling that pure joy and excitement, but instead stressing about, am I going to get a deer or not? Worried about, am I working hard enough? Am I doing the right things? Am I putting in enough time? Is somebody better than I? Do other people think I'm a lousy hunter? When he or she sees his friends or the people he follows on social media having success, he's maybe not excited for them. He's feeling bad about himself. Does any of this sound familiar? Is any of this familiar?
You might as well be talking. You could be talking about running. You could be talking about writing. You could be talking about any sort of pursuit, and I'd be nodding my head along to say this is the path that a lot of people, and I would say a lot of people inclined to strive, go down. It's the same path that I went down, not in hunting, but in my chosen sport of running. And I think it's the same path that people go down when you look at even business success, is that it follows this pattern of like, we get captured, we fall in love with something. It is a magical, joyful exploration of the thing that pushes us from interest to passion. As we get passionate, We kind of cement and narrow around the thing. We're getting better. We're getting better. But at some point, the thing that has driven us, that has gotten to this point, almost starts to get in the way. Where the success, the striving, the achievement, the working harder than everybody, the watching all the videos, following all the things, like starts to be the thing that creates the pressure, the anxiety, and takes away the thing that initially drew us to it, which is that joy, that camaraderie, that exploration. And all of a sudden, we find ourselves in a place where we used to want to do the thing, and now it almost feels like we have this burden of have to. And that is the battle of, I would say, most high performers everywhere.
Is this new, or was this as true? Was this as true 50 years ago, or is this a phenomena of the 21st century and the many different strange coinciding things we have going on with media and culture and whatnot?
We've always had this to a degree, but what I would say is the 21st century has like put it on steroids.
Yeah.
We've exacerbated so much because think about it. Now that comparison, that how do I measure up against people is, 100-fold. It used to be, I don't know how it works in hunting, but you could, at the highest levels, you could kind of compare each other. You go to competitions, you have whatever, you have some comparison point. But nowadays, it doesn't even take, any of that. You literally go on Instagram or TikTok or YouTube or what have you, and you can find 1,000 different comparison points. So our comparison has kind of gone from local to global and at an earlier stage. And that has made this, again, 10 times worse and harder. The story I tell in the book is of my own journey, which is, back in the day, I'll put it this way. Back in the day, I was very good. I was a very good runner. And I kind of fell in love with the sport because it was fun and enjoyable. And I was pretty good at it. But my pretty good at it was comparing against the kids in my class at school.
Right.
Which is, 30 kids, maybe in the whole school, 100 kids, right? But now if I think about it, it wouldn't be that. It would be, oh, I ran this mile time. Let me go look online and compare that to all the other 12-year-olds in the world. And guess what? Instead of feeling energized that I'm pretty good at this thing, I would compare to everyone and be like, oh my gosh, I am minutes slower than everybody. I am slower than, in my case, I would have been slower than many, girls of the comparable age.
Mm-hmm.
Why would I do this sport? I'm not good at it. And that would take away some of the things that we do. So I guess long story short is I think, especially on the comparison piece, it is so much bigger and harder now because we can compare to anybody that instead of motivating us, that puts us into this like why try protective anxiety pressure mode that so many of us feel.
Yeah. So yeah, I feel like you have done a lot of work that's been adjacent to this over the years. You've explored a lot of kind of tangential topics, but why did it feel like now was the time to tackle this very specific thing head on? Why this book right now?
I think we always write the books that we need. And similar to your journey, like my journey was from go all in, really successful, try and get better, to now, I just turned 40 a couple weeks ago.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. And I have 2 young kids. And you start to see the world through a different lens. And you start to say, okay, like I better rethink this because maybe I'm going to go down this path. I have like this fork in the road. I can go down this path that is chasing, externalize, feel that pressure, lose that joy, or I could go down this other path. And I've tried to go down that path towards joy exploration. But the other part of it that I kept seeing is I spent a lot of my time coaching. And at first that was just in running, but now I help out high performers with all lenses. And the problem I increasingly saw is that all of these people had incredible potential. Their talent was through the roof. Their work ethic was through the roof. But if you look at the objective measures, they weren't getting where they were capable of getting.
Mm-hmm.
And at the heart of it, almost always came down to what we're talking about right here, is they wanted it so bad that all of a sudden that want, that desire often cut from the external was getting in the way. And from athletes I was working with or talking to or like researching about, is I kept seeing that like they all hit this moment where they had to essentially say, okay, I got to change something up. I got to free myself up by almost doing the opposite and letting go a little bit. And all of a sudden, like their enjoyment would come back. And more importantly, somehow the performance would increase and improve because like that pressure, that anxiety, that all that stuff like just got alleviated just a little bit.
Well, it seems like there's like two different curves that you might see happen. There might be like a bell curve where you see someone who's slowly improving, and they're going down this path, and then they're seeing significant improvements. And then at some point, stuff starts to plateau and level out a little bit when these types of challenges start hitting. And then I think for a lot of people, you might then start dropping down the other side when the anxiety, the pressure, the stress, all of it takes the fun out of it for you, and you lose the motivation to do it, or you know, crash and burn in one of so many different ways, and you see your not only your performance but your interest in the pursuit at all crash. But I think then there's probably other people that somehow navigate this differently and crash through that plateau and then continue to evolve, grow, perform, and enjoy that thing. And in reading your book, you put words to many things that I have been figuring out and maybe didn't have the specific language that you put down here for it, but many of the things that I've been gravitating towards and recognizing as having truth and validity to it. And one of those things that you call out in here is the importance of kind of our motivations being either external or internal, and the importance of that. You referenced a study towards the beginning of your book called A Meta-Analysis of the Dark Side of the American Dream. And I'll just quote this little bit here from it. You said, "They found that when individuals' extrinsic aspirations dominated their intrinsic ones, it was universally detrimental to their well-being. It's not that we need to have solely intrinsic motives. It's the balance that matters. When we tip too far to the external, we languish instead of thrive. When winning is all that matters, it might work in the short term, but over the long haul, we increasingly play out of a place of fear and perform worse." Can you expand on that for us? What you mean by, extrinsic aspirations versus internal, and kind of why that maybe is a keystone understanding for this whole thing?
Yeah, absolutely. So extrinsic are the achievements, the accolades, the rewards, the tangible things that you get out of achieving the goal. It's the bonuses you get at work, right? The intrinsic is different. So it's that piece of joy, the exploration, the almost play that we experience. The way I like to uh, conceptualize this delineation between the two is, remember when you started the thing. You told Bill's story
Mm-hmm.
about going on the hunt, being outdoors with, family, and just the sheer excitement of that adventure.
Yeah.
That is the intrinsic. You're not going on that hunt to say, okay, how many buck can we kill, right? How good can we be in this? No, you're on that because you're part of this where you belong, you feel that joy, you say like, this is an adventure, let's go. And as we age and as we get into adults, we often lose a little bit of that. And as we get better at things, we kind of forget that interest in it, inner joy that got us interested in the thing and turned it into passion in the first point. And that's what the whole thing is about. Is it's not that we shouldn't, care about winning or shouldn't care about the end result or achievements. We're humans. We're going to. We're competitors. We're strivers. We're pushers. You and I are gonna care about the outcome. And that's totally fine. But the problem comes when we mess up that balance too much. If the outcome is all that matters, if winning or losing is self-defining, then we are kind of screwed. Because what research tells us is that when winning is all that matters, or the outcome, we're too much towards that extrinsic, we activate our motivation styles. We have, essentially, you can sum it up into two styles. We either approach the thing or avoid the thing. Meaning, in sports term, we play to win or we play not to lose. And what research tells us is that heavily on the extrinsic side, we start shifting from that approach to the avoidance. And the bigger the achievements or accolades matter to us, the more we go to avoidance. Now, why would that be? For a simple reason, because we've told our brain that, like, getting this, this outcome is so important that our brain goes like, well, if it's that important, then I'm going to protect you from the downside. Which means we start avoiding the thing a little bit. And you can see this in different aspects of your life, right? It's the athlete who maybe comes up with all the excuses for why they're not going to perform, right? You say like, oh, I haven't backed off for this race, right? I'm a little tired going in, so if I don't perform, or it's the student who says, you know what, I could have studied more, but I'm not going to. And then afterwards, you do that because you could have said, well, I got a C or a B, but if I would have studied, I would have gotten an A. That's the avoidance speaking. That's that protective, mindset. On the flip side, if our motivations are more tilted a little bit more towards the intrinsic, we approach the thing. Why? Because we're in that exploration mode. Because if we win or lose, yeah, it might sting if we don't, get our outcome we want. It might sting a little bit, but it's not self-defining because that intrinsic is pushing us to understand that, like, part of the reason we're doing this is the journey itself, to experience the experience, to go on the hunt and be out there for hours and hours and see, with our friends and see what it's all about.
Yeah.
And that's where it all comes, I'm simplifying here, but modern world has pushed us too much out of balance where that extrinsic dominates, and we forgot about the thing that got us interested in the pursuit in the first place.
Yeah. So much of it seems to be tied to expectations and like the expectations that we bring to the pursuit. And one of the ways that you describe this is discussing, and maybe one of the ways to break out of this is to have or to shift from an outcome orientation to a process orientation. Can you expand on that a little bit as how, I know it's similar to this, shifting from avoidance to the other alternative, but can you talk a little bit about that? And it's been something that I have, been really working on myself, because like in our world, you can get very tied to, the specific goal of, man, this year I'm going to hunt and harvest this specific mature buck, or like, this is my goal to have this caliber of success. And you will work your tail off all year for it. And it almost becomes to feel like a life or death issue for you. When in fact, you then, because of that, have stressed, have worried, have made it almost a military mission to get there. And then even if you do get there, you hardly enjoyed the process at all because you were so focused on the obsession with the goal and beating yourself up all on the way because it's not going the way it's supposed to. And then, God forbid, if you don't achieve that outcome, then you are kicking yourself and beating yourself up for how horrible you are and how you didn't do enough or how you made the wrong decisions or, 9,000 other possible things. Can you speak to that shift from outcome orientation to process orientation? And A, why is that healthier? And B, how?
Yeah, absolutely. So think of it like this. What's the purpose of goals? I mean, you can simplify it into this: is they're to motivate and to tell us what's important.
Yeah.
Right? If we are totally outcome focused or outcome orientated with our goals, what happens is, at first, they might be a little motivational. You might say, okay, I want to achieve this. I want to run this fast. I want to achieve this, get this many, bucks, whatever it is. Okay. At first, that might be a little motivational, but what happens over time is and you described it right there, is it shifts from motivating you forward to it becomes this like signal where it's like, still hadn't got it. maybe you're not close. Maybe you're not going to get there. And that little thought in the back of your mind like starts to build that anxiety, that pressure, that worry. And instead of motivating us forward, it motivates us to kind of like go into that protective mode. If we look at what does the outcome orientation do to our focus, it largely blinds us from everything else. So we only see the outcome.
Mm.
And what we know from both sport and life, and even some research on hunting, is that shows us is that when we become blinded to everything else, but this, achieving X, Y, and Z, it makes us where we miss opportunities, right? We miss opportunities to go down a different path, maybe to try something different, to try a different process or orientation towards maybe achieving that outcome, and we get in our own way. If we look at process orientation, what does that mean? It means a couple different things. It means taking us away from that outcome and saying, okay, what are the steps or the journey that I want to go on that puts me in the best position to do this? So that maybe that's something as simple as, I need to train, X number of days to get this done. Or the process is like to give myself a shot here, literally and figuratively.
Yeah, in this case.
Is to go hunting at this time with this people, with this, process behind it. Meaning like, these are the steps that I get there. In that shift is subtle, but it's important because it takes you away from framing it through a zero-sum lens of like, did I win or lose? Did I achieve or not? And it makes you reflect on, did I do the process to give myself the best opportunity? And if we can reflect in that way, it takes it away from that threat mode and takes us into this kind of like learning, growth, and understanding mode. Because whether you got the thing or not, what matters is, did you execute your process? This is why in sports, like every football coach in the world says, focus on the process.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because simply they know that the win or loss is sometimes out of your control and like dependent on factors that might be a little bit of luck, right? You can't control how many deer show up, right?
Yeah,
in the situation.
I can't control the weather. I can't control what other people do. I can't control so much.
You can't control so much. So, you could have a horrible process and still succeed. But what that means is next time you're going to go still do that horrible process and probably not have any success because you haven't learned and grown from the thing. If instead you focus on the process, what are the steps that I need? That's what matters. And the other part that I'll say as well is that when we look at process orientation, it is often shifting from achieving the outcome to what is the experience that I want? So what do I want this to feel like? What is the point of like the journey that I'm going on? Like, what's the point of the hunt? Is it just to achieve this outcome? Or am I going, to explore my potential maybe in this? Am I going to test a new way of, tracking, taking downs, like using new equipment, whatever it is? Like that's the experience. And if you can focus on that a little bit better, again, it allows us to come out of it with a new way to judge kind of, our success or failure versus the kind of black and white zero sum way.
Yeah. And it's a little bit tricky to do this sometimes because I think we're surrounded by an alternative framework for how we should set our goals, right? I mean, in most any other place, how is success judged in basketball? Well, how many rings does LeBron have versus Michael Jordan? Or what was the marathon time? Or what was your minute time? As a hunter, we are taught to, did you kill a deer? Did you kill a mature deer? How many deer did you kill? How much meat's in the freezer? Whatever your goal might be. And one of the things I've tried to do is as I've learned more and more, but this process orientation is better. I've tried to almost zoom out and try to maybe understand like what does success look like beyond that? Almost like, what are the values that are important to me? Or as you said, what are the experiences that are important to me? And then work backwards from that. And so understand, okay, so high level, what are the things that have really mattered to me, or what brought me the most joy? Well, it was actually all the times with my family and friends, and those stories and that camaraderie and those shared experiences. Okay, that's a thing. Maybe actually those best memories, those stories that stick with me, the experiences that I've never forgotten. Well, that was because I tried something new, or I was in a landscape that was spectacular and awe-inspiring. Or maybe it was because I was teaching somebody something. I was sharing my love of this with someone who is new. So I've tried to start identifying these different bigger picture things that then allow me to say, okay, well, I identified that, you know, being inspired, being in awe-inspiring landscapes, trying new things, all of that has brought me a lot of joy and satisfaction and fulfillment. Okay, how do I solve for that then with my future goals? How do I have these experience related goals or process related goals that aren't, did I kill a deer, but are more so, hey, go and explore a new landscape and try this thing with a friend or family member that you care about. So this is me rambling on. What I really want to get to though is I'm curious, how do you do this? What is your goal setting protocol, or how do you execute a process orientation as you're trying to achieve things in writing or running or whatever it is? I'm curious
Yeah.
just to get a framework for that.
But first off, I love that from you. I think that's spot on, and I think it gets at something that is really important. In before giving you my process, I'll just highlight it is that by doing that, what you've done is you've gone from narrow to broad,
Mm.
because like the outcome achievement narrows us, right, and it blinds us often. And you wouldn't, if you just wanted to achieve, you'd keep going back to the places where you know you could get the end result. Because going to a new place, a new awe-inspiring place is risky because you don't know it as well. You might not be able, you might come away with nothing. But by reframing it, you give yourself a chance to, and in the end result is you might have a better experience,
Hmm.
and like it rejuvenates those intrinsic motivators. So for my process, whether it's running or writing, it's very similar. Is I start with, what is the point? How am I defining success around this? And to me, I could say with writing it, you could say, well, I need to sell this many books so that I can, achieve this list or what have you, but that will drive you nuts.
Yeah.
It'll drive you nuts. It'll make it a miserable process. So I start with, why am I writing this book and who am I writing this book for?
Did you
And
write
that
Mark? Did you write Mark Kenyon down as that?
That, that that was it. That was the for one person.
Yeah.
Mark, this is for you. This is it. But no,
Nailed it.
in reality, it's the things that we talked about. Like this book is for why? It's because something I've struggled with and I've seen other people struggle with. And I think modernity has made it 10 times worse. So let's put it out there. Why? Because I want to help people like you and I who are strivers, pushers, to be able to stay in the things that we enjoy and love for a longer period of time. So that is front and center in my mind. Okay. If that's why I'm writing it, then I work back from that and say, okay, what sort of processes allow me to do that best? And in the writing world, what does that mean? It means I want to go broad with exploring these ideas in a variety of places. Because if I just go narrow and I talk about running or writing, the two things that I know best, it might reach runners and writers. But I know, again, my end goal is to help as many people as I can. I know people from hunters to business executives to entrepreneurs face the same thing. So I need to go broad in my research, broad in my interviews, broad in my interests. And that puts me down this path of, okay, go broad, explore the topic. And then as I narrow towards the writing process, then it goes, okay, from those broad stories, what do I think are A, going to be most impactful for people? And then B, give them enough evidence to convince them that this Steve guy is actually giving them stuff that works and he's not just making that up. And that shapes the kind of narrative flow or the evidence behind the book. And then you just kind of go from there. But it's a simple process from like broad exploration to narrow, how do I turn this into a book? And it's all shaped by that not how many books can I sell, but at the end of the day, I look back and I say, okay, given everything I've written, do I think this is going to help a lot of people? And hopefully I can answer yes. And guess what? If I answer yes, then that motivates me to do things like your podcast or other podcasts or other shows or write articles that hopefully go wide enough to pique someone's interest and say, hey, I'm gonna go check out that book, Win the Inside Game. And a byproduct is, yeah, hopefully I sell enough books to, feed my family. But it's not the result. And because of that, I don't feel that anxiety, stress of, oh, I need to sell this many books. No, I'm going to have a great conversation with Mark who gets it, because like this is an important topic and hopefully it will help people who are listening to it.
Yeah. So it's funny. In my hunting life, I'm not as good at this, but I'm better at this in my outside the rest of my career side of life, like writing. So I'm an author as well.
Yeah.
And I know being in that world, for 97% of us, you don't write a book to get rich, right? It's not a slam dunk financial proposition for the vast majority of us. That said, when I have looked at whether or not I'm going to write a book, I've looked at it as not, am I going to write this book to make X number of dollars or sell X number of copies, but rather, will the process that I will go through writing that book bring me fulfillment and joy and meaning, right? And that for me has checked a million boxes, because I know I'm working on, as you described, I know that the process of writing a book is going to mean that I'm going to spend, in my case, my kind of books means I'm going to spend a lot of time reading and researching topics about wildlife and conservation, the history of our natural resources and wildlife and public land. So I'm going to learn about something I'm fascinated by. I'm going to have to talk to experts in these fields to learn more. Again, connecting with like-minded folks that inspire me and that can teach me. I know that I'm going to have to go in the field to study and experience these things on my own. I know that to promote this book, when it's all said and done, I'm going to have to go out there and speak with this community and share my experiences with the community and hopefully inspire and educate this audience. So all of those things, all the process that leads to writing a book, the actual steps I have to take on a day-to-day basis will bring me joy, fulfillment, and meaning. That right there's my success, regardless of whether or not I sell one copy. So that makes it a very easy win for me when I know, like, man, even if this thing doesn't make a dime, all of that is a huge win. It's much harder for me to somehow translate that to the hunting side of my world or to running or something like that. And I'm not sure why that is.
I think it's pretty simple. Do you see yourself as a writer first?
I don't know. I don't know. That's a good question. Probably not.
So same with me.
Yeah.
I came to writing kind of secondarily of like, it's an avenue to share these things.
Yes.
So I think it's like, it's not quite as intertwined, so it's easier to do that. In hunting, early and often is part of who you are. It's like intertwined with you. Same with me on running. So it's a little harder to do that, even though I bet if we zoomed out and said, like, think of the same things, right? Maybe it's not interviewing people, but it's going on hunts with different people. Or for me, like experiencing different races and different places with different groups and training with different people. That process is the same. That joy I get from it is probably the same as you. But because we're like intertwined a little bit more with the thing or the pursuit, I think that's where it becomes, more difficult. And that's where I think, we have to almost be more aware of that pull, because it's easier in those things that we're intertwined with to kind of forget this other world that we kind of take for granted in something that, we care about, but maybe it wasn't always front and center in who we are.
Yeah. So when within the book, as you were discussing some alternatives to this mindset, one of the approaches you discussed was a mastery approach. And I think you were discussing this kind of in an educational framework, but I found this idea of a mastery approach being something that would be really relevant to my world and what we do. Is that something you could speak about a little bit, what that mastery approach is, or how we might be able to apply something like that to a pursuit of any kind?
Yeah, absolutely. So the best way to think of mastery is to think of a craftsman, right? Could be any sort of craft, but the old school craftsman who is spending their time like creating the thing. And what we know by thinking about like creating or crafting the thing is like what is important of it is they want to master that subject. Their goal isn't, hey, I'm going to create the perfect widget or whatever and to sell it. It's this is my craft. Like I'm going to be a craftsman. Let's explore it. And when it comes to the educational standpoint, there's some great research that shows essentially this is if your goal is to get a on the test or score a certain score on the SAT or whatever have you a standardized test is that might motivate you a little bit, but coming back to what we talked about earlier with the outcome orientation, it brings a lot of fear and anxiety with it. If your goal on the other hand is to understand the subject, meaning just like you talked about when you were saying I'm going to write and I'm going to have to go understand a lot about outdoor conservation. That means I'm going to have to read a lot of new things and talk to a lot of new people. That is mastery because your goal isn't, you know, I'm going to go get a PhD in conservation so that I can, become the world expert and get paid this much to do so. No, it's the understanding that is driving the thing. So when we look at mastery, whether it's I almost frame it as like understanding and exploration. And when we frame that and look at it, it tends to motivate us more internally and like tends to build more resilience over the long haul. So again, it's hard in our own domains, but I always come back to that. In my own world of running, I've had to shift my viewpoint more away from the outcome to what is the point of running now.
Yeah.
And I think when I go on runs and I challenge myself with hard workouts, I'm like, I'm just going on exploration to see how do I navigate this pain and fatigue?
Mm.
Because like, who cares if I'm running 5-minute miles or 6-minute miles or whatever have you? The experience, if I'm working hard, is the same. And if I can work on how am I going to get better at navigating, of dealing with those like inner doubts or that voice in my head that's telling me like, hey man, stop. Like this is painful. Stop doing it. Like mastery is about not the end result of the how fast I ran, but it's like how did I do at like navigating and exploring my limits on that hard race or hard run? And I think we can apply that to basically anything.
Yeah. Kind of continuing down this path, one of the natural things that I think happens, and we've danced around this a little bit, but one of the natural things that happens when you fall in love with a thing and you get good at it, is that there's a very natural tendency to start specializing in that thing. When you find your thing, you tend to want to specialize and get better and better at that. And at first, maybe it happens by just happenstance that you're in love with this thing so much that you just can't stop thinking about it. But then also at some point there tends to be maybe a sense of obligation that comes about because like, hey, if you want to be the best basketball player you possibly can be, you can't have time to go and play baseball. You can't do baseball anymore because that should be when you're doing club ball. That's when you should be doing, work in the gym. If you want to be the best possible white-tailed deer hunter you possibly can be, there are people in my world who say this, hey, you shouldn't go fishing. You shouldn't go hiking. You shouldn't go camping. You shouldn't do other things. If you want to be as good as you should be at this, every day of the year, you should be doing something to become a better deer hunter. And when that happens, which has happened to me and many other people, you talk about in your book about this risk of going narrow and cementing is the word that you use, which I thought was really interesting. Can you discuss a little bit more? And again, we've talked
Yep.
about this a little bit, but can you speak to it a little bit more with that particular vocabulary, what that means, what that looks like, and why why that tends to lead us more and more towards these negative things we've mentioned?
Yeah, so here's how I look at it. When you cement yourself to a thing, meaning you are the, white-tailed deer hunter. What we've
Yep.
done is narrowed ourselves so much and told our brain, and our brain internalizes it as this is all that matters. this defines who I am. Whether I achieve my goals or not, reflects on me as a person because this is my entire world. And what do you think happens when we tell our brain, like, this is our entire world? It goes into like do or die mode. And
A lot of pressure.
we might think like, oh, do or die. When my back is against the wall, that's when I perform the best. Well, I'm sad to say that even if you look at research on world-class athletes, the vast, vast majority of people do not. We default towards fear, running away, avoidance, fleeing. We do not go towards taking on the challenge. And what research overwhelmingly shows is that, yeah, at some point we have to specialize a little bit. But if we go too far towards that cementation, it often backfires. This is why I love the research on, there was a study a couple years ago that looked at Nobel Prize winning scientists.
Mhm.
So you think like these guys are geniuses, like they're in the lab all the time, probably to get their breakthrough that won them a freaking Nobel.
Yeah.
But if you look at the research, Nobel Prize winning scientists were more likely to have a regular hobby or other pursuit than those scientists who were still really good, but a rung or two below. And if you look at psychology, what it tells us from sport to scientists to, I guess, hunting, but basically everything, is what it does is when we have some diversity to ourself, meaning there's other hobbies, other interests, is it makes us a little bit more resilient. Because if we don't achieve the thing, we still have something to fall back on. And I want to tell you a story real quick on something that's not in the book because I forgot about it until the book was done. But when I was a young runner, okay, I was a 401 miler in high school, and then I hit this spot where I just didn't improve, and it drove me nuts. And I was like so narrow and so all in on running. And I met with this sports psychologist in college who was world class. Okay. And he's telling me this story and he says, "Hey, Steve, do you know such and such runner?" And I'm like, "Yeah, they were one of the best in the world." Okay. Olympian, one of the best, fighting for medals, fighting for Olympic gold. And he said, "Yeah, she went through a really hard spot in transitioning from college to pro as well." And I said, "Okay." He goes, "Do you know what helped her make that jump finally to like this competing for Olympic medals?" I said, "No idea." He looks me dead in the eye and says, "Knitting." And I'm like, "Knitting? Are you kidding me?" 20-year-old Steve, he said, "Look, she used to go do all her workouts, lift the weights, go all in, and then come home. And she was worried about lifting the weights, doing the workout, what the next race was. And she just all day when she was sitting on the couch or watching TV or on the computer, like her mind wouldn't let go of it. And that created such overwhelming anxiety where she never got out of like the stress mode into the recover repair mode, which was where we adapt and grow. And for whatever reason, taking up knitting and joining a group of knitting friends gave her that space where body and mind were on something else. Of course, 20-year-old Steve didn't listen to that because he was like, "What are you talking about? I'll just keep going all in." And
As
it didn't
20-year-olds
work.
do.
Yeah, it didn't work. I should have taken up knitting or another hobby. But the point is, that's what the research literally says. Now, it doesn't have to be knitting, right? It could be, in your case, as you mentioned, like fishing, another type of hunting. Maybe you take up, bow hunting in addition to, whatever. And what that does is it diversifies your sense of self a little bit. And there's research on this tying it to hormones. So briefly, I'll give you some science. Is what if we lose and it's literally all in on this thing, what happens is our body goes through a stress hormone release where it just jacks up our cortisol, which is not good for us. Okay. It puts us in this like panic, stressed, anxiety state. If we lose and we have other things, other pursuits in our life that matter, we don't get that big cortisol release. It's small. And instead, we often get a testosterone release, which often people think testosterone is tied to aggression, but it's actually tied to status. And we get that testosterone release because our brain realizes, like, yeah, it sucks to lose at this thing. But guess what? I'm going to go fishing tomorrow instead.
Yeah. I'm more than just this thing.
Bingo. And that's it. Makes us resilient and able to perform in the main thing better than if we're just, solely focused, solely all in.
Yeah. So if you were to write the Steve Magness rules for pursuing excellence in your pursuit, whatever it is, and if you had to throw out a handful of these guiding principles, what would the first handful of those be that come top of mind? If I want to be great at my thing, but I want to avoid these traps that you're discussing, what should be on my list of top commandments?
Well, I think a lot are things we mentioned. Diversifying your interests, your pursuits, your meaning. Okay, it will help. I think understanding and accepting that like winning outcomes matter, but you better have some sort of process or mastery approach underlying it. I think other things that really matter that are often not talked about enough are things like surrounding yourself or creating an environment that allows you to potentially fulfill that potential, to strive for that. So everything from our friends, our colleagues, our hunting buddies, our training partners, to the environment we train in, all impact us so much, so much. And if we neglect those things, we're going to be in a bad state. So I think environment as well. I think the other things that come to mind are being able to zoom out and have perspective. So the reason I think this is really important is because, and I'm talking to folks like you and I right now, is generally the striving or chasing comes naturally.
Mm-hmm.
And going in the other direction does not.
True.
And when it comes to performance, a general rule of thumb I have is the thing that makes us great will eventually be the thing that gets in our way. So we need to go the other direction, meaning we need to have things that zoom us out and give us perspective. Maybe someone else listening to this podcast is really good at zooming out and taking perspective and saying, okay, it's not life or death if I get this hunt in. Great. Then you might need to go the other direction and figure out how to stoke that caring a little bit more, right? And feeling a little bit maybe more consequences. That's totally fine. But I think understanding that the thing that makes you great is going to get in your way, and how to set your life up so you have skills on the opposite side is really, really important. And then other than that, I mean, I'm sure I could come up with a lot more, but we'll start with there.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. And I want to, I guess there's something related to this, which I found really interesting. That takes up a massive amount of mind space within the hunting community, which is performance under pressure and performance in the clutch, right? And I think the argument you make in this book is that all of these things we just discussed leads to poor performance in high pressure situations. It leads to choking. It leads to all of these things happening. And so you explored this idea of performance under pressure kind of in a unique roundabout way compared to many other folks I've seen do this. But I also know you've explored this in some of your other work. I think you guys talked about some in Peak Performance. But when it comes to hunting, it's a very clear, obvious, high pressure moment. There is literally a shot that needs to be taken, like a free throw in a basketball game or a putt in golf. In this case, you are literally taking a shot, but in the most serious situation that you could ever imagine, in that your trigger pull or pulling through on the bow, you are making a life or death decision, actually. And the implications of whether or not you do this as well as you possibly can, either leads to a quick, ethical, precise kill of an animal that you do as best as you possibly can, so it is done the right way, or it could lead to all sorts of horrible outcomes, which no hunter wants to have happen. A miss and or wounding an animal that you don't recover, which is the absolute worst case scenario. So this is something that weighs on hunters tremendously There's a ton of time and energy spent on making sure we can perform in those moments and not choke. What does the research show, first and foremost, about why people choke?
All right. So here's what it gets at is a combination of psychology and biology, which essentially says all of those things that you talked about lead to that feeling and experience of pressure that we all know, right? It's when we see the deer, the buck, and it's like that our heart jumps, right? And all of a sudden, what felt smooth is now kind of jittery and hard and spastic almost.
Yeah.
So what happens here is there's two key concepts that I think are important here. Is our brain is predictive, meaning in the scenario, it's sitting there before it even happens. It's like, what are we going to do if we see a deer?
Yes.
What are we going to do if we're standing on the free throw line or standing, about to shoot a penalty kick in soccer? It's predicting. What it's trying to do is make sure that you survive. It's not trying to make sure that you win or achieve the thing. It's that you survive. So what that means is it has all these different paths. In colloquially, we know them like fight or flight. But the reality is we have, a dozen different paths. And with each path comes a different cognitive ability, meaning focus, and then also like biology in terms of like hormones. So earlier I talked about cortisol, stress hormones.
Mm-hmm.
Generally, we get more cortisol when we're in a situation that feels like a threat. When we're in a situation that feels like a challenge, we get less cortisol, we get more testosterone and more adrenaline. So it feels like we're a little bit more excited with a tinge of anxiety instead of anxiety with not a lot of excitement. Which way we go depends on our brain's predictions. Now, what does that come down to? A couple different things. Can we meet the demands of the task before us? Meaning, have you put in the training?
Mm-hmm.
Have you been in the situation? Can your brain say, hey, if we do X, Y, and Z, we're likely going to get, Y result. If we haven't, then it's going to tend to default towards threat mode. Okay? Because why would it put yourself in that position?
It's making an accurate prediction of the fact that you are not prepared for this moment.
Right. And you got to think like the way it's thinking of is not, I'm going to make you screw up the shot. The way to think of it is your brain's all essentially going, I'm going to create so much anxiety that you don't even want to take the shot. So that you just escape,
Yep.
The other part of it, so the last part of it is it's also when it comes to that threat or challenge, it comes back to like how important is this thing and self-defining is this thing, which we've talked about a lot. But if it literally feels like if I make this shot, I'm the man, or if I lose it, everybody's going to know I'm a failure, then you're more likely to default towards that threat mode. Because again, your brain's going to go like, well, why take the shot? Like, I don't want everyone to think I'm a failure. Like, this is not the juice is not worth the squeeze.
Yeah.
So that combination determines like where our brain kind of sends us. So what does that mean when we look at like choking and underperformance and that is we want to give it the best evidence that we can that we are prepared. That means an accurate appraisal of what we're capable of, what we've trained to do. And then also an accurate appraisal of the demands of the task. So not fooling us. Again, I know nothing about hunting, so sorry if I get this wrong, but not fooling us that, we normally make a shot at, 50 meters and this one's 150 meters and being like,
right.
We got it, no problem, right? No, you need to know what your capabilities are, both personally and with the equipment you have. And the accurate appraisal is more likely to put us in the challenge than BSing ourselves through this like fake macho stuff. So all of that sets the stage. Now, the good thing is there are tools and tips that allow us to kind of nudge towards that threat nudge towards that challenge response. One of the ways, and I'm sure you guys are familiar with this, is that if you set yourself up with a routine, what does that do? Your brain goes, oh, okay, we've been here before. Like these are the same steps that I'm doing, right? To get us there. Other tools that work well as like all of your psychology and cognition are all intertwined. So, for instance, with our focus, what happens when we're really stressed? Instead of being able to like just focus on the things that we need to, our brain often jumps around. It's thinking like, well, what about I just felt a little breeze. What about the wind here? Oh, what was this sound over here? Maybe I should be focusing on this instead of that. Our brain jumps around with stress because it's just like looking for stuff, right? We can control that to a degree based on how and what we focus on. So for instance, there's research, and I looked it up. There's someone hunting and shooting on this in addition to sport.
Interesting.
Is generally for successful shots or successful kicks of the penalty kick, you can tell because athletes or individuals shooting will have what they call a quiet eye moment. Meaning right before their shot, there's this calmness and focus of the eye where it just kind of locks on to where it needs to be locked on. And it's not darting around, doing its saccade thing where it's varying.
So this isn't like a metaphorical quiet eye or like I felt like I was quiet. This is literally a physiological, they're measuring the eye.
They are literally measuring. They have glasses on that are staring at your pupil and measuring the movements of the eye. And it will literally, in those who are successful, it will be a longer period of time where there's this quiet eye moment versus those who are not. It's generally a shorter period.
Wow.
And the good thing is, like, this is to a degree trained. How do we get there? That routine matters. But it's also in practice when you are like shooting or like working on that penalty kick, like understanding what are the things that I'm supposed to be focused on. For instance, I don't know the hunting research well, but in soccer, when you take a penalty kick, if you are darting between where you want to shoot it, the ball, and the goalkeeper, you are less likely to make the shot. If you know that, you know what, my process is I'm going to look at the goalie to see where he is, and then I'm going to, focus on a spot and then kick it there, you're more likely to do it because you've essentially said, these are the things that are important here. Same with in kicking field goals. They found that if athletes feel like they're choking, one of the best things they can do is like look at kind of just beyond where you want to kick it and just like focus on that thing and just like all your attention there, because it will like quiet the rest of your brain because your brain's getting the idea that this is what matters.
So simplifying the process, almost like dumbing it down almost to a few simple focus points.
That's it. That's what you're doing. Because again, what is your vision doing? It's telling your brain, what do I need to pay attention to in this moment? When your brain is saying like, oh, this is stress mode, I'm going to look around and try and find everything that I can. The same works if you look, we could go a million different ways, but same goes with your breathing, right? Why do we say, hey, slow your breathing down? Mm-hmm. Because what you're doing there, taking deep, longer breaths, is you're telling your brain to send the message that we're not anxious, we're calm, right? And when we take deep breaths, our brain goes, oh, forget the stress mode, like activate like the quiet restorative mode. The same goes with our self-talk, right? If it's jumping all over the place and on like the negative stuff, what works for self-talk when you're in those moments? Literally latching on to a mantra or a couple key things and just repeating those and saying like, this is what matters. This is what I'm focused on.
And I've heard a lot of these things, like the reframing idea, the idea of like talking yourself through the fact like, oh, this anxiety and excitement and these nerves and my heartbeat going 1,000 miles an hour, that's not nerves. That's not being nervous. That is me being excited for this moment because there's a wonderful opportunity ahead of me. I've heard people say this and it all sounds great, but I wondered to myself, man, does that actually work in real life? Is there research behind something like that? Has that been to some degree quantified?
Yeah, so the reframing works, but it tends to work on what I'd call moderately challenging things and not super challenging.
Okay.
So reframing works when it's like, I can handle this. I'm feeling a little pressure and anxiety, but I can handle this. If it is literally, if you are on the free throw line and whether you make it or not wins the NBA championship, reframing is not going to work because your brain's not dumb. It's not going to be like,
Yeah.
this is excitement. No, this is a bit of anxiety. So in those situations, like what happens is instead of trying to reframe it, you accept it. You say, yeah, this is some anxiety. I should be feeling this way. That matters. I'm not going to get rid of it. It's just part of it. So what are the things that I should be focused on in this moment that still allows me to perform? And that's where it comes back to like, literally, what is your vision on? What is your thought process on? What are your routines that you're going through? The other thing that really matters here that we often neglect is also like who's around us.
Hmm.
If in those moments, if we're with teammates who like we really feel connected to, or if you're on a hunt with people who truly support you, that will allow you to perform in those clutch situations a lot better than if it's you alone or if like you're surrounded by people who, you know, don't support you win or lose. So it's also like the environment around us that will impact our ability to perform in these situations under pressure.
Yeah. I liked something you wrote. You said that clutch is a state, not a trait. I think that rings really true. And I think a state of mind is something you can cultivate. It's not something you're born with. It's not something you just get. It's something that you steward, that you foster. And that seems like something that any one of us can develop, right? Versus just like, Steve's clutch, Mark's not.
So this is brilliant. And I talked to some, you're spot on. I talked to some people high up in the NBA who studied this. Because you always hear these things like, Michael Jordan, he's clutch, or whoever is clutch and whoever's not. And they studied this with all the data and the analytics. And they found that basically no one is consistently clutch. Meaning no one has the clutch gene and just like generally comes through when it matters. And the research backs this up, which is why I said clutch is a state, not a trait, is sometimes you can get in that state and sometimes you don't. But I think what it tells us is that like we all are capable of like cultivating those things, right? And those ingredients that are more likely to push us there. It just takes practice and experience. And it takes experience as well, not messing up and internalizing that like we messed up, because that's going to get in our way of getting in that state in the future.
Yeah. So the unfortunate but simple truth of the matter is that no matter what we're pursuing, whether it's hunting or a run or shooting a free throw in the NBA finals, we are sometimes going to fail, right? And that is something that I think ties back to a lot that we discussed at the beginning, like decoupling your identity from your outcomes. So in this case, I guess where I want to kind of wrap this up is around this idea of failure. When you don't achieve your goals, when you miss the buck or you miss the free throw. You wrote about this in the book about 4 different components you specifically called out for bouncing back from failure. I thought were something that would be very relevant to someone in a hunting scenario when you either just, for whatever reason, don't achieve your hunting goal or you straight up miss the shot, whatever it is. Can you speak about those 4 key components? That being, I don't know if you have those right in front of you. I'll read them for you just in case you don't. One is shift out of protect and defend. One's keeping it informational, not personal. One is reframing, which we just discussed. And one is revising. So could you speak to all 4 of those, or any one of them, or any other thoughts you have on just dealing with failure in such a way that it doesn't destroy you and your future success?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this is really important. We often give platitudes to failure, say, "Hey, we've got to, learn from it." But what really matters is how we internalize and how we handle it.
Yeah.
And a couple strategies that you mentioned there that I think are really important is generally when we lose at something, it sends our body into this kind of protection stress mode. And the longer we stay in that, the more we ruminate, we catastrophize, and our brain uses that information for its future predictions as like, no, this sucks. And Steve's gonna, if he's in this spot again, he's gonna fail again.
Yeah. Vicious cycles it creates.
It's the vicious cycle. So what do we have to do? Step one is get out of that stress mode. So the easiest way to do this, and we've kind of danced around it, is, and the research backs this up, is do things with friends that are fun and interesting. Because it literally, like, the antidote to failure and stress is socializing with friends because it shifts our hormones. So when we socialize with friends, we get more oxytocin, which, guess what? That decreases cortisol and increases, the good things that allow us to perform again. So socializing with friends, being around others, and sometimes even trying to make sense of the thing with those who are supportive. So there was this wonderful study on professional rugby players that showed that after a game, after a tough loss, when they went over what went wrong with people who supported them versus strangers, when they were strangers, like, all the stress hormones go through the roof and they perform worse, a week down the line at their next game. When they did it with friends or teammates who supported them or coaches who supported them, you got the opposite. Good stress hormones, put them in a recovery state, performed well later. It's the same with us. So what's your process in dealing with failure? Hang out with friends, have some way to make sense of it. That's what I mean by, like, informational, not personal, is have some process, just like a athlete reviews the film, to do it in a non-threatening way where it's like, okay, how do I learn from this and grow from this? And then the last one, we talked about reframing, but I think the revising is really important. And it gets at what we've talked about a lot, is when it comes to failure or even success, the story we tell about it is what our brain will use in the future. So and the nice thing is we are in charge of the stories we tell. So how are you going to tell this story? Are you going to tell it with learning and growth and, like, understanding? Or are you going to tell this, like, super negative cautionary story of, like, oh, I'm never going to go back to that place again? Because, like, how you internalize it will impact your behavior in the future.
And when you say tell your story, I mean, you're not saying how you tell the story to your friends. You're saying how you tell the story to yourself, right? This is like some self-compassion here a little bit, maybe, right?
Yeah, exactly. There's self-compassion on it. And we've all been like, here's how I like to think of it, is we've all had those experiences where internally it just gnaws at us. And the way we tell the story is like this annoyance, this gnawing feeling. And often that puts us in, like, this negative state, right? We don't have great memories about it, right?
Yeah.
And that puts us in that avoidance. So when I say tell your story, is like, internally, how are you going to do that, right? When you're practicing, when you go back out and practice, or you go out on your next hunt and your mind goes back to the last one where you came up a little bit short, how are you telling yourself that? Is it one where you learn, grow, develop, or maybe even, laugh at the outcome sucked, but, like, the journey and the camaraderie had a big positive effect, right? That's fine too, but it can't be this big negative thing weighing us down, because that's going to put you in a state of, like, fear and threat when you come in similar situations in the future.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so much to unpack here, and so much relevance to our world that I'm very glad that this conversation came together, Steve. I can't recommend the book enough to folks. If you haven't yet, definitely need to pick up a copy of Win the Inside Game. And when this podcast drops initially, it's going to be just before the book releases. So folks can pre-order the book where? Anywhere, I'd assume? Or is there a place you prefer them to?
Nope. Anywhere books are sold. Get it wherever you want.
All right. And then can you give us a rundown of any other content you want folks to know about, the books they might be interested in picking up in addition to this one? You guys have a great newsletter. Anything else you want people to know about?
Yeah, I think the best place to find us is at our newsletter. It's the Growth Equation newsletter. You can find the links at my website, stevemagness.com. I mean, I'm on social media, YouTube, Twitter, or X, Instagram, all of them at Steve Magness is pretty interesting. And I just appreciate the conversation. And I love, having these conversations with high performers like yourself, and especially in those domains that aren't my niche, because I think it's so cool to see that regardless of our pursuit, performance is performance, and the ideas translate across.
Yeah, they absolutely do, Steve. Thank you so much for the time. I really enjoyed this, and I'm excited to continue to put these ideas into action and continue to see what you guys share with us in the future. All right. Thank you all for being here. Hope you enjoyed that one as much as I did. Definitely recommend you go and check out Steve's books. They are first class, and I found them really helpful. And with that, I'll let you guys get to your rest of your days. I appreciate you. And until next time, stay wired to hunt.